Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, so we can now continue with the shorter discourse of the simile of the elephant's footprint. And now we're getting into the meaty part, the part which actually is interesting on the gradual training. And first of all, the Buddha, as he often does, gives a nice simile for how this is supposed to, how this gradual training actually works, and how you actually find out whether somebody is fully enlightened. What is the way to find out? And this is the simile for that. And the Buddha says, Brahmin, remember the Buddha is speaking to a Brahmin who has come to see him because he has been told that the Buddha is very wise, more wise than anybody else, and etc., etc. Brahmin, suppose an elephant woodsman were to enter an elephant wood and were to see in the elephant wood a big elephant's footprint, long in extent and broad across. A wise elephant woodsman would not yet come to the conclusion, indeed, this is a big bull elephant. Why is that? In an elephant wood there are small she-elephants that leave a big footprint, and this might be one of their footprints. He follows it and sees in the elephant wood a big elephant's footprint, long in extent and broad across, and some scrapings high up. A wise elephant woodsman would not yet come to the conclusion, indeed, this is a big bull elephant. Why is that? In an elephant wood there are tall she-elephants that have prominent teeth and leave a big footprint. And this might be one of their footprints. He follows it further and sees in the elephant wood a big elephant's footprint, long in extent and broad across, and some scrapings high up, and marks made by tusks. A wise elephant woodsman would not yet come to the conclusion, indeed, this is a big bull elephant. Why is that? In an elephant wood there are tall she-elephants that have tusks and leave a big footprint, and this might be one of their footprints. He follows it further and sees in the elephant wood a big elephant's footprint, long in extent and broad across, and some scrapings high up, and marks made by tusks and broken off branches. And he sees that bull elephant at the root of a tree or in the open, walking about, sitting or lying down. Then he comes to the conclusion, this is that big bull elephant. So you can see here again another very straightforward simile by the Buddha, very easy to understand. Right? This is one of the beautiful things about similes. It's often very down to earth, straightforward, easy to understand, and even complex ideas of the Dhamma can actually be brought down to earth in this way and be made very clear. And the point that the Buddha is making here is that when we make a claim about something, when we say that something is true, it is only true when you know it for yourself directly. It's what they call like empirical evidence, right? Empirical evidence is evidence that you see for yourself. It is right there. That is the evidence. Only then can you come to the conclusion that this is what I have actually seen. And of course this simile then is a simile for how you also deal in Buddhism. In Buddhism it's the same thing. Sometimes we think this person has attained this person has attained that, but in reality it's only when we ourselves become fully enlightened or awakened that we can understand whether somebody else has attained a similar kind of state, and certainly whether the Buddha has attained a similar kind of state. So in many ways Buddhism is like an empirical, science might not be the right word, but it's an empirical religion. I'm not sure if I like the word religion either, but it's based on empiricism anyway. You see for yourself, and then do you know. And then comes the other side of the simile, what we're actually supposed to do. And this then is the gradual training here. So too Brahmin, here a Tathagata appears in the world, accomplished, fully enlightened or fully awakened, perfect in true knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of the worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed. He declares this world with its gods, its maras, its brahmas, this generation with its recluses and brahmins, its princes and its people, which he has himself realized with direct knowledge. He teaches the Dhamma good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. And he reveals a holy life, the brahmacharya, that is utterly perfect and pure. So this is the beginning of the gradual training. The beginning of the gradual training is not that you start with certain practices. The beginning of the gradual training is that a Buddha arises in the world. A Tathagata is a Buddha, right? This is the word the Buddha uses about himself. That is the gradual training here. And that is actually a very important fact, because the gradual training can only exist when there is a Buddha. A Buddha is like somebody who breaks through the darkness, who breaks through the veil of ignorance, and who comes to understand the world as it actually is. And that has to be achieved, happen, before the gradual training can even exist. And of course that has very important ramifications. It means that a lot of the time, if there is no Buddha around, then you are in darkness. And there is no chance of achieving light, because there's nobody to give you any proper guidance. And this is why you often have, it's often said that this human existence is very rare and very unique, precisely for that reason, because it's very rare to find somebody who is able to break through and actually see things as they truly are. And just to get some idea of how difficult it is, you can imagine yourself, we are all here practicing our very best in meditation here. And how many of us have actually attained awakening here? You know what I mean? It seems we have the path. The Buddha has given us the path. He has told us this is what you have to do. And still, it is not easy. Still, it takes a lot of dedication. Still, there are very few people who actually can do it. And yet the Buddha, he was able to do it without a teacher, on his own. And that is what makes the Buddha so special, and what makes the Buddha so unique, and what, why he deserves so much respect, because he was able to achieve by himself what most people can't even do when they're told exactly what they have to do. So that is the importance of this idea that the gradual training always starts with a Buddha arising or appearing in the world. And it's interesting, this idea. It's a bit strange to say a Tathagata appears in the world. Basically what it means is that somebody, and it can be anybody, a Buddha is not some special person, it can be anybody can really be a Buddha, right? It's just a matter of accumulating somehow the right qualities, building up the right qualities, and then when you reach a kind of critical mass of qualities, then you make the breakthrough. And it can, in theory, happen to anybody. That's important to keep in mind. The Buddha is not somebody special, not somebody superhuman. He's human just like anybody else, just like all the rest of us. And the nice thing about that, the nice thing about thinking about the Buddha as a human being just like us, what it means is that his teachings are much more relevant to us. If the Buddha was somebody very special, like a god, or somebody who had accumulated vast amounts of merits over eons and eons, or the Buddha was somebody with kind of special powers that ordinary people don't have. If that was the case, then the teachings the Buddha gives to us might not be that relevant, right? Because these might be the teachings of a superhuman being. In particular, when the Buddha teaches from his own example, from his own life, because this is what you find in many places in the suttas, and some of the best suttas, in my opinion, are when the Buddha talks about his own life, how he did it, how he actually penetrated to the truth. Now, if the Buddha is somebody special, then teaching from his own life doesn't make much sense, right? Why would he teach from his own life if he is special? Then it wouldn't really be relevant for us, because he is different. But the very fact that he does teach from his own life means that he is setting an example. He says, this is how I practiced. And because you are in essence just like me, you should be doing the same thing that I was doing myself. So he's saying, we are the same. You should follow my example. That's essentially what those suttas are about. And we're going to have a look more later on at some of those suttas where the Buddha talks about his own life. And he says, we should do what he did. And the other thing which is nice about this idea of a Tathagata arising in the world is that it's just a Tathagata, right? This is what happens every now and again. Every, maybe, this eon, they say there's like the auspicious eon, there's 5 Tathagatas or Buddhas arising here. But every now and again, somebody has the right accumulated psychology, if you like, to be able to make the breakthrough to the Dhamma. So every now and again it happens. And this makes Buddhism quite different from most other world religions, because in most world religions there's like one savior, right? One savior happens to come around, and he happens to come around just when we are here. It's very fortunate, but it's a bit hard to believe. Why would that savior come around just when we are here? It makes more sense to me. I find it more convincing to have a philosophy of life like Buddhism, where this happens regularly. So it's not as if we are completely unique, right? If people tell me I'm unique, I don't really believe that. We are not really that unique. We're just people like everybody else. It's like feeding the ego to think that we are somehow special and we deserve some kind of special treatment by having a special savior or anything like that. The very idea that there are regular Buddhas, to me, is a very sign of authenticity of the Buddhist teachings. So anyway, so a Tathagata appears in the world. And then the next passage here, which comes afterwards, this is this famous passage that we do chant all the time. I'm sure you do this chanting here in Sri Lanka as well. The Itipiso, Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vijja Charana Sampanno Sugato Loka Vidu, etc. This here, which comes there, is that particular chanting here. And because this is really the recollection of the Buddha, this is how to think about the Buddha, I think it's useful to have a little bit of a look at this particular teaching and what it means. Because if you can relate to the Buddha in the right way, in a good way, and you can think about him in a way whereby you can understand what the Buddha is, then that is the Buddhanusati, which can give rise to joy in meditation practice. And I always like to emphasize this idea of joy, because joy is one of the essential factors for meditation to work. This is kind of the psychology of meditation. One of those psychological factors required is joy, the piti. And this is one way to give rise to that piti, to remember what the Buddha actually is. So he's accomplished. This is the arahant. In other words, in Pali, it really means that he is worthy, not really accomplished. Accomplished is more like the idea of an arahant, not really the meaning of the arahant. He's fully awakened. He is perfect in true knowledge and conduct. This is, I think, an important thing, the idea that he's perfect in knowledge and conduct. What that means is that your knowledge, if it is a knowledge of some sort of significance, it also affects your conduct. Conduct and knowledge are not two separate things. And what that means is that it has certain ramifications, if you like, certain effects on your conduct, the knowledge that you have. And in particular, the Buddhist kind of knowledge, the knowledge of awakening, then shows itself externally. So that's why we can tell, at least have some idea of whether somebody has reached awakening or not, right? They should be kind, they should have metta, they should have compassion, they should be peaceful, very, very peaceful. They should not be upset by anything anybody says. They shouldn't have any greed or desires for anything. So there are some very clear ramifications of this. So knowledge and conduct always go together. This is one of the, I think, important points here. He sublimed, the sugato, or sometimes translated as well gone, which is a more literal translation here. And then you have knower of the worlds. This means that he has understood, if you like, samsara, the various stages of existence and all these kind of things. That's essentially what that means. So he has penetrated, understood what life basically is about, the extent that life extends in the various directions. And he is the incomparable leader of persons to be tamed. I personally think it's better to translate as maybe incomparable leader of tameable persons rather than persons to be tamed, because the idea is really that even with the Buddha, there are certain people which have the characteristics that they can achieve awakening, they can be tamed, so to speak. Taming here means basically reaching awakening. You are taming your defilements, right? You're taking away the obstacles, and that is what it means. So the case happens to be that certain people, you cannot teach them. Even if you teach them, they listen, they don't get the point, right? Okay, they hear the Buddha's teaching, you might find it very beautiful, you might find it very inspiring. But many people say, what is this? What is this all about? This doesn't make any sense to me at all. And of course then you are not a tameable person, because you don't grasp that there is any significance to the Buddha's message, right? So the Buddha is the incomparable leader of persons to be tamed. In other words, there's nobody equal to the Buddha. He's teachers of gods and humans. Doesn't just teach the humans, but also the devas, which is interesting. Even if you become a deva, you can still get Buddhist teachings. You are awake, he is awakened, and he is blessed. So this is basically what a Buddha is. He is somebody with these particular qualities. And it's good to reflect a little bit on these qualities and make them something that you can make sense of. And sometimes when I think about the Buddha, what the Buddha means to me, I usually think about two qualities in particular. And that is the quality of wisdom on the one hand, and the quality of compassion on the other hand. And the quality of wisdom is here very clearly stated, in particular through knower of the worlds. He has understood what samsara is all about. Implication there, of course, is understanding of rebirth, understanding of karma, and understanding the extent of potential rebirth that any being can fall into. So the wisdom is first of all the understanding. And then, of course, more than that, the most important aspect of the Buddha's wisdom is, to me, is that he understands suffering and happiness fully. Full understanding of suffering and happiness. Now, what is it that human beings want? What do we all want? What is it that drives us in life? What is the craving we have inside of us? Everything that drives us is somehow towards a sense of either decreasing our suffering or increasing our contentment, peace. Happiness is like a container word for all those things. Somehow we want to feel more fulfilled, more complete. We want to feel something better for ourselves. And everything in our lives basically is driven by this search for something that we're actually looking for. And basically that's happiness. And the Buddha has the answer to what we're searching for. And that is why his teachings are so profound. And that is why his teachings are so important. Because he has the precisely thing that we are searching for as human beings. And sometimes people ask, what does Buddhism have to offer the modern world? The world is now so different from what it was 2,500 years ago. But if it can answer the very core need of a human being, of any kind of being, then surely it is just as relevant today as it has ever been. Because the search we are searching for now is exactly the same search that people were engaged in at the time of the Buddha. The search for happiness, in short. The search for an end of suffering is just another way of saying the search for happiness. And that is what wisdom is this understanding, profound understanding of happiness and suffering. There's somebody who has got the goods, as they say. There's somebody who understands exactly what we all want. And of course, that person becomes very, very valuable to the rest of us because this is what we all want. So that is the wisdom side of the Buddha. And the other side of the Buddha is the compassion side. Not only does he have what we want, not only does he understand what we want, but he has the compassion to teach us. And one of the interesting things about the Buddha is precisely that when the Buddha had attained his own awakening, basically there wasn't much point for him to hang around anymore. There was no point for him to stay in the world. He was happy, he was complete, there was nothing more to do, right? So why then does he go out to teach if there is nothing to do? And there is only one thing that drives a Buddha to teach, and that is compassion. So a Buddha, essentially, his only driving force is compassion, nothing else inside of him. And that is after he has attained awakening, not before. So isn't that wonderful to have a person whose only purpose in life is compassion, nothing else? Think about that. That's the only reason why he exists. That's the only reason why he gives teachings. That's the only reason why he does anything at all, is because of compassion. What a wonderful thought that is. And how easy it is to place your confidence in somebody who is just acting from compassion and nothing else. So you have this being who has two sides to him. He has the wisdom. He has exactly what we want. He knows what we all need and what we want. And on the other side, he has the compassion to share it with us. That is what the Buddha is, to me, in essence. Compassion and wisdom. What a beautiful thing that is. What a wonderful thing that is. At least for me, that is how I think about the Buddha. I don't know if that particular way of thinking works for you. Everybody has to find their own way of thinking. But it's just to give you an example of how to reflect about the Buddha as a person. So he lived in the world for 45 years for no other reason, looking after the people around him. And sometimes people say, well, it wasn't us, though. He wasn't teaching us. He was teaching people 2,500 years ago. But remember, and this is another nice thought, remember that when the Buddha was teaching, he knew that the wheel of the Dhamma was going to keep rolling in the world for a long, long time. He realized that, and that's why he phrased his teachings. If you read the Buddha's teachings, often it's very repetitive, right? The reason it's so repetitive is because it was given in an oral culture. Everything was kept orally. Because it was kept orally, it had to have a certain structure, oral structure. And that idea of giving it an oral structure was precisely to be able to keep the teaching into the future. So the Buddha realized that there were going to be people like us here today, people like anybody who is a Buddhist on the planet today, who would still be listening to the teachings to this particular day. So in a sense, he thought about us. 2,500 years ago, he knew there were going to be people like us. He had us in mind when he was giving these teachings. So we are also, in a sense, fall within the compass of the Buddha's compassion. So there you are. The Buddha was thinking about each one of us. Isn't that a nice thought? I find it very beautiful to think like that. And then when you read the teachings, you know it came from a wise person, a compassionate person. You feel you can place your confidence there. You don't have to be afraid when you see something which looks a bit strange. You don't throw it out because you know it was said by somebody who only came from compassion. You think about it very carefully, you consider it carefully, and then maybe you accept that maybe it is true because it came from a person like that. So this is one of the powers of reflecting in this way. Okay, so that is just a little bit about Buddhanussati. And remember the purpose here. The Buddhanussati, the recollection of the Buddha, the purpose is to give rise to a sense of pamudja, gladness, happiness and joy inside. And when that arises, that is one of the very important prerequisites for meditation practice to work. Okay, so that is the basic qualities of the Buddha. And then it says here that he declares all these things, the gods, the maras, the brahmas, the recluses and brahmins, the princes and people, I think should actually be the devas and the people. Because he has realized these things with direct knowledge. So what the Buddha is doing here, by declaring these things, he is teaching the world right view, right? He's saying there is all these different realms. You can get reborn in all these different realms. You can keep on going round and round, up and down, according to your karma. That's what he's saying. He's giving basically rise to right view in people. So remember that I said one thing I said yesterday, that the gradual training can be matched with the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is where right view comes into it. The Buddha is giving us right view at the very beginning. So the first factor on the Noble Eightfold Path. And then he teaches the Dhamma, good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. And he reveals a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. And that holy life that is utterly perfect and pure would then normally is considered basically the Eightfold Path. And normally, I think, the highest expression of that would normally be the monastic life. Why? Because the monastic life was laid down by the Buddha specifically to be a vehicle to take you towards awakening here. So monastic life is usually considered the highest of the paths, right? It doesn't mean you cannot make progress as a layperson. It just means that there is that extra commitment as a monastic is usually a helpful thing to speed up the process. Okay, so the Buddha has expressed right view, karma, rebirth, that there is somebody awakened in the world. And then the next step, this is where things start to happen, because then he starts to get disciples. And this is the next step here. A householder or a householder's son or one born in some other clan hears that Dhamma. On hearing the Dhamma, he acquires faith in the Tathagata. Possessing that faith, he considers thus: household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy, while living in a home, to lead the holy life utterly perfect and pure as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. On a later occasion, abandoning a small or a large fortune, abandoning a small or a large circle of relatives, he shaves off his hair and beard, puts on the yellow robe, and goes forth from the home life into homelessness. So here is how the process begins. You go to the Tathagata, you go to the Buddha, you hear the teaching, and you acquire faith. And that is when, based on that you decide to go forth. Of course, it doesn't mean that you just go once and listen a little bit. Very often it would mean that you would go again and again, you would listen to the teaching, you would look at the Buddha, you would consider whether he really is awakened or not. It takes time to get to know somebody, right? So you keep on watching and you keep on listening, and then eventually the faith or the confidence ripens in you to the point where you want to go forth. So it looks here like as if it's very fast, but actually it probably takes quite a bit of time. And then he considers household life is crowded and dusty. Now, dusty here is usually considered a metaphor for defilements, or maybe it is a metaphor for it being too dry. There is not enough kind of spiritual moisture perhaps in the household life. But life gone forth is wide open. So suppose, so then he thinks, because the life gone forth is better, and that is how you can lead the utterly perfect and pure holy life, then he decides to go forth on that basis. So again, I just want to make the point here that this doesn't mean that the gradual training is not applicable to lay people. It is applicable to lay people as well. The point here is just that because this sutta leads all the way to full awakening, that's why a monastic is the example here. Because it is a monastics that can actually attain the full awakening of arahantship. And I should also say that, of course, this includes men and women as well. Whether you are a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni is not clear here, but obviously it makes no difference. So he shaves off his hair and beard, puts on the yellow robe, and he goes forth from homeless to homelessness, and he abandons all his possessions, he leaves all his relatives behind, and then he goes forth into homelessness. So this gives you some idea of the ideal kind of monk. The ideal kind of monk is somebody who is poor, right? Who doesn't have many things. He leaves all the fortune behind. That means, of course, that once you become a monk, you shouldn't start amassing the kind of fortune after you become a monk, because then there's no point in leaving it behind in the first place. So we have to assume here the purpose actually is to be poor. Why is that the point? Because happiness as a monastic is not to be found in material things. That's the whole point. It's to be found somewhere else. So that's why you can leave these things behind. Okay, so let us continue now on what happens next. Having thus gone forth and possessing the bhikkhus training and way of life, abandoning the killing of living beings, he abstains from killing living beings. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, he abides compassionate to all living beings. So that is, you recognize that is very similar to the first precept, right? Very similar, this idea of abandoning, abstaining from killing living beings. But there is something extra here. There's something more to this particular thing than just the first precept. The first precept just says, I undertake the precept not to kill living beings. But this one here has something additional to it. And this additional thing is actually very important. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, he abides compassionate to all living beings. Now, one of the things about the Dhamma, which I have often noticed and other people have noticed as well, very often we teach the Dhamma in a kind of negative way. We say, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you should keep these precepts, you should, you shouldn't speak in the wrong way, and all these things. But actually, if you look at the gradual training, and remember, this is the main kind of way that the Buddha teaches the path, is through the gradual training. Here, in the gradual training, he talks about the positive aspect of virtue. It's not just about not doing the bad things, it's about doing the good things. And this is so important. So it's not just, I shouldn't kill these beings or people. I should actually be kind to them. I should be compassionate to them. I should be gentle. I should act in kind and nice ways. And this is very important, because I think a lot of the joy that you can get in things like sila nusati, when you consider your sila, yes, you can get joy by thinking about not having done bad things. And the Buddha gives examples of that in the suttas. And the classical example is where the Buddha says that when you keep the 5 precepts, you give other beings freedom from fear, freedom from being abused, freedom from being taken advantage of. They can trust you. And that, of course, already is very beautiful. So if you can think like that, and that can give you joy, that's wonderful, of course. But the other side, when you do something kind to somebody, is often very productive of joy. When you actually help somebody, you go out of your way, you do something special. And sometimes I think about my own life, the kind of things that I have done, which have given me joy. And quite recently, there was a very simple little thing that I remember. That I was by myself in the monastery in Perth, and we have like a place where we have all the toilets and showers and these things. And I went to one of the toilets, and in the toilet bowl, there was like an insect, a beetle, lying on its back in the toilet. And it was obvious that this beetle, lying on its back with the feet in the air, trying to, just wiggling its feet, couldn't do anything at all. It was going to drown, right? So I didn't really think. I just grabbed a little piece of toilet paper, and I fished this little beetle out of the toilet and put it outside. And I didn't do it because I had to do it. There's no rule in the Vinaya that says you must save insects from drowning. Fortunately, otherwise it would be very busy. But so there's no rule like that. There was nobody watching me to see I was doing the right thing. I did it because it felt right. And suddenly I got the sense of joy from doing this is a tiny insect, right? It's nothing. But I felt the sense of gladness inside from having done that. So it occurred to me, the power of doing something good is so powerful. You do a tiny bit of good, and that tiny bit of good has such ramifications. So if you do that sort of goodness towards a human being instead, or towards something else, then it's even more powerful. So the tiny little things in life sometimes have incredible power. And I know that there are places in the suttas where the Buddha says that even if you are just washing the dishes, and there is little scraps of food left in the sink after you have washed the dishes, you should take those little scraps of food left and you should throw it out. And when you throw it out, you should think to yourself, may this be for all the little beings out there, all the little insects, all the little animals. And just by thinking like that, Instead of throwing it out absent-mindedly without thinking what you're doing, by throwing it out with that thought, may this be for the little beings, you're creating a lot of good karma. Sort of thing that can give rise to joy later on. So this is the power of goodness, and this is why it is so important to actually be as good as we possibly can, because it leads to wonderful states of mind for ourselves. We're doing it, in the end, we're doing it for ourselves, right? Because we feel happiness. Being selfish, you don't think, hey, this is going to be for me. It's not, that's not how you think, because if you think like that, you destroy some of the goodness. You do it naturally because it's nice, but you also reap the benefit, which is wonderful. So that is the importance here of sila. Remember, sila in the Pali word sila doesn't just mean morality, it means like habit and conduct. So it's more than just morality, it's good conduct, good habit in general. And the other thing which is interesting about this first rule here of sila is that shows you that abstaining from killing, that is one aspect of the first precept. But what it really is important here is not so much whether you abstain from killing or don't abstain from killing. What is really important is the mind state, right? You come from compassion. You are based on compassion. And it is that, if you know the suttas, if you know the basis of virtue in the suttas of sila, you know that any act which is based on a wholesome state of mind is going to be good karma. Any act that is based on an unwholesome state of mind is going to be negative karma. So, what if you kill somebody, but you are motivated by something good? Is that possible, do you think? Is it possible to kill an animal, perhaps, or kill a human being and be motivated by something good? Could that be the case? If it is possible, then it wouldn't be bad karma, right? Now this is the reason I bring this up is because sometimes you get into very difficult moral dilemmas. And it's important to remember what morality really is, where it comes from. It comes from motivation. What is your motivation? And one of the big ethical dilemmas that is often talked about in the West these days, I don't know if it's talked about here in Sri Lanka, but certainly in many Western countries, is the idea of euthanasia. Euthanasia means that you kill somebody who wants to die. If somebody says, I've had enough of this life, the body is very sick, they have just pain all the time, pain relief doesn't work, and they say, please, I want to get out of this, I had enough. Out of compassion, please help me to make an end of this. Now if that happens, if somebody asks and say that I want to die, are you actually killing them if you help them to die? If you're coming from compassion, you're saying, okay, I guess your body is hopeless, you can't do any practice anymore. If you really think your life is no good, then perhaps I'm willing to help you out of compassion. If you do that, is that bad karma? Or is it perhaps even good karma, or at least neutral karma? You can see how difficult it is, right? It all depends on your mind state. You have to know your mind very well. But if you know that you're coming from wisdom, that you're coming from compassion, then perhaps in those circumstances it may not be bad karma to help a person like that to die. I cannot tell you that it is the right thing to do or it is the wrong thing to do. You have to make that mind up yourself in whatever circumstance. But I'm just saying that from the basic principle of Buddhism, it is not obvious that killing always is bad karma. It is the motivation is more important than the actual act. Take the next precept. The next precept is about stealing. Now imagine a mother with a child, maybe a very poor mother, and the little child is starving, and the child may die unless he gets some food, right? And then the mother says, well, child, or I have to steal something for the child. Now if the mother then steals something for her child, and maybe she even thinks, as soon as I have the possibility, I will give back what I have taken. Now, is it bad karma or is it good karma? And the answer is, it's very hard to say exactly what it is. I think if she is coming from pure compassion for the child, and she is fully dedicated to repaying what she is taking later on, I think it may not be bad karma at all. It may be good karma in that situation because her motivation is pure, right? So it's very important always when we look at virtue and morality to go back to what is driving us, what is our motivation, and only then can you say whether something is good or bad. It's not as black and white as people sometimes make it out to be. If you keep the 5 precepts, you're always right. If you don't keep them, you're always wrong. It isn't as simple as that. They're all shades and degrees of motivation inside of us. Maybe there's a little bit of compassion, a little bit of greed. It's often mixed up, right? And these mixed up karma is what the Buddha calls black and white karma with black and white results. In other words, it's like gray karma, right? It's neither fully pure nor is it fully dark. This is how I read the suttas. I mean, many people will say that this idea of gray karma is not really right because it actually contradicts how the Abhidhamma teaches. But in my opinion, that's how the Buddha taught in the suttas. It's the grey karma, and it makes sense because our intentions very often are very mixed, right? There's a bit of many things. And even if you do something kind, it's maybe not 100% kind. It's a little bit compassion, not 100% compassion. Or if you are greedy, it's not 100% greed, but a little bit of greed, right? The things are never as simple as either black or white. Usually, it's somewhere in between them. So knowing one's intentions, knowing one's motivation, the driving force inside of you is very important. And that should be the final basis on which we make moral judgments in our lives, based on our motivation. What is driving us? What is the reason why we do an act? So that is probably a little bit controversial, what I've been saying now. So please, don't take on board the things I say on faith, anything like that. Think about it for yourself. And if it makes sense for you, fine. If it doesn't, that's also fine. I'm just throwing these things out because this is how I look at these issues. Okay, so that is about the killing of living beings. And then, of course, the second thing he does, he abandons the taking of what is not given. He abstains from taking what is not given. Taking only what is given, expecting only what is given. By not stealing, he abides in purity. And here, in this case, there is no positive opposite. I said there is like a positive opposite to these things, because the positive opposite to stealing is generosity, right? And generosity is like a big topic on its own in the suttas. So here you can think of generosity as being the positive aspect of not stealing. And you abandon in celibacy. He observes celibacy, living apart, abstaining from the common practice of sexual intercourse. Vulgar, I think, is not a good word because vulgar has a kind of very negative sense. The Pali word is a gammo, and gammo literally means of the village, that which pertains to the village. In other words, that which obtains to ordinary people, right? The common, the ordinary practice. So you can see this is about monastic life. They're talking about celibacy here. So this is the highest kind of conduct. So that is the bodily actions. And you remember I was talking the other day about what this thing called the Dasa Kusala Kamapata, the 10 ways of wholesome action. And these are the 3 bodily ways of wholesome action. And then next ones are the verbal ones. And there's a very similar kind of pattern that emerges from the verbal wholesome actions. So abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. So here, again, there isn't much of a positive side. You abandon lying and you don't, you tell truth as much as you possibly can. But again, remember, and this is a thing I want to stress here because I think it's very important, is again, it is why you, if you do lie, the why you are lying is more important than whether you are lying or not. You can lie perhaps for compassionate reasons, or you can lie for selfish reasons, right? So if you, for example, you go to a hospital and somebody asks you, what is the doctor saying? What is my prognosis? Am I going to die? and you feel that it's not the right time to tell the person, you may say something which may not be 100% true. Say, oh, okay, I'll tell you some other time, or you might say, I don't really know, or something like that. But in that case, you are basically trying to be compassionate, right? So it's not so bad. But if you lie because you are greedy or because you are angry, then it is really much worse. So again, it is why you are doing these things. I'm not suggesting that lying is good at any particular point. It may always be bad, except perhaps in certain extreme cases. But there are degrees, and these degrees are very important. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here, in order to divide those people from these. Nor does he repeat to these people what he has heard elsewhere, in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, the promoter of friendships, one who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. And so here, instead of saying things that divide people and pull people apart, you say things that actually bring people together. If somebody else is complaining about somebody, saying, oh, they did such bad things, and if you talk negative about other people, that tends to divide people, right? Because you're placing negative ideas into somebody else's head. But if instead you say, actually, this person has many good qualities. Maybe they have some bad qualities, but also they have so many beautiful qualities. Then you're reminding the other person of something good. And then you are creating harmony by just saying something nice about another person. So this is one way of creating concord, to remind people that there's always a bigger picture out there. A very nice thing that is to do when you think about the world today, how divided it often is, how many wars are going on. You have just recently finished your war here in Sri Lanka, and you know how much suffering that is. I'm sure many of you have felt it probably very close. Maybe you have friends or relatives who may have died in that war, I don't know. But war is so much suffering, right? So if we can create harmony, if we can create unity, we're actually providing a wonderful service to humanity here. Even by doing it a little bit, sometimes we become an example to others, right? I always remember in my own life how sometimes somebody has said something, and afterwards I thought, wow, that was very beautiful. That was very wonderful. I wish I could be as good as that. I wish I could do the same thing. So sometimes you do something nice, and you don't know the repercussions of doing something nice. Other people pick it up, other people listen to what they say, and then it ripples out, and it actually has an enormous effect. So small things can often be very powerful. And then abandoning harsh speech. He abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words that are gentle, pleasing to the ear and lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many, and agreeable to many. So this is again I like this passage, the words that are gentle, right? You speak gentle words. You don't speak harshly. You train to speak in a gentle way here. You know what kind of words do you like to hear. You know the people who speak with a sense of metta and kindness. You know how nice it is to listen to people like that. It just feels good, right? It feels good to be in the presence of such people. And it is said elsewhere that harsh speech is a kind of speech that leads away from samadhi. And gentle speech is a speech that actually leads to samadhi. So one of the problems with harsh speech is it actually is very destructive for your meditation practice. Whereas gentle speech and the accompanying mind state which goes with gentle speech is actually leads to samadhi. So then we have the last one, abandoning gossip. Not really gossip. Gossip is the wrong word, I think. It should be idle talk. Gossip is more like divisive speech, I think. At least often it is. He abstains from idle chatter. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks what is good, speaks on the Dhamma and the discipline. At the right time, he speaks such words as are worthy, recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. So isn't another beautiful idea, I feel, this idea of speaking words that are worthy of recording, right? When you listen to somebody and you feel that this person is saying something really worthwhile, and you listen because you want to like record in your mind what they're saying. It's like reading the suttas. The suttas are like words worthy of recording. And you read that and you think, wow, this is beautiful. And you record what is being said. How much of the talk we hear is worthy of recording? It isn't that much, right? It's rare that we hear really the gems, so to speak, in life. So that is the avoiding of idle chatter. Of course, it just doesn't mean that we should be kind of completely quiet all the time. There is a right time for being polite and to engage somebody in a polite way. We shouldn't kind of, be stupid about this. We have to be intelligent about these kind of things. So a little bit of politeness and goodwill towards others is of course important. But you can see at least where it's heading, right? You can see the kind of general trend of these kind of things. So, there you are. These are then right action of body and right speech. And further down, we come to also the right way of using the mind as well. But before we come to that, there is a long section here, and this section mostly relates to monastic life. I'll go through it because it might be interesting for you to know what is actually in here. And perhaps we can make a few comments as we go along. We'll see what happens as we read through this. So, he abstains from injuring seeds and plants. He practices eating only in one part of the day, abstaining from eating at night and outside the proper time. He abstains from dancing, singing, music and theatrical shows. He abstains from wearing garlands, smartening himself with scents, or embellishing himself with unguents. He abstains from high and large couches or seats. Now, the preceding thing there is interesting because one of the things about the monastic vinaya, the patimokkha rules for the monks, which is fascinating, is that there isn't any rule which actually forbids the monks from wearing garlands and smartening oneself and dancing and theatrical shows. There isn't any patimokkha rule about that, which is quite strange when you consider it, because one of the basic of the 8 precepts, right? So it isn't in the patimokkha, but it's here. It's in the Dhamma instead. And this is one of the things that I like to often talk about, is the fact that is the relationship between the vinaya on the one hand, the rules in particular for the monastic community, and the Dhamma. What is the relationship between the two? And the relationship is that the Dhamma is higher. The Vinaya emanates from the Dhamma. The Vinaya is a consequence of the Dhamma, right? The Dhamma comes first, then comes the Vinaya. So we should always place the Dhamma first, and the Vinaya should fall into the framework of that Dhamma. So the very fact that these things are not mentioned in the actual patimokkha rules doesn't mean that these things are therefore acceptable for monastics. Anybody who practices the path should then, of course, follow the teaching in the Dhamma itself. So it's interesting that actually it is there, right there, in the gradual training here. Okay, and then we have, of course, the abstaining from accepting gold and silver, and this means money, and this is also a rule in the patimokkha for the monks and also for the bhikkhunis, not to accept money. And he abstains from accepting raw grain, from accepting raw meat. And this, of course, is about cooking. A monastic is not supposed to cook for themselves, so there's no need for raw grain and raw meat. He abstains from accepting women and girls. He abstains from accepting men and women slaves. He abstains from accepting goats and sheep. He abstains from accepting fowl and pigs, from elephants, cattle, horses and mares, from accepting fields and land, from going on errands and running messengers, from buying and selling. And then the last part, from false weights, false metals, false measures. He abstains from cheating, deceiving, defrauding and trickery. He abstains from wounding, murdering, binding, brigandage, plunder and violence. I find it rather funny that all of these things are mentioned in there, as if monks were about to do all these kind of things. It sounds a bit over the top. So but anyway, you can see the trend here. The thing here, what is going on here, is about you don't accept money or any valuables, right? Many of these things were considered highly valuable, both today and also at the time of the Buddha. Like land. Land is always a very valuable thing. Wherever you go in the world, land is always one of the most valuable things. And of course, animals, right? The ownership of animals. I don't know, certainly at the time of the Buddha, you often counted your wealth in the number of cows you had. If you had many cows, you were a wealthy person. So this again has to do with the simplicity of life, of not owning expensive and valuable things. And the last part there, obviously, you don't cheat and you don't defraud and you don't do all these kind of things. I think that is fairly obvious. So that is the section on virtue in this gradual training, and a very interesting section, I think, when you read it in detail. Lots of important points in there. Maybe I will read one last paragraph before I stop. And this last paragraph is also another very nice one. And having then undertaken all this virtuous practice, then what happens? The following thing happens. He becomes content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out taking only these with him. Just as a bird, wherever it goes, flies with its wings as its only burden, so too the bhikkhu becomes content with the robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out, taking only these with him. Possessing this aggregate of noble virtue, he experiences within himself a bliss that is blameless. So this is the idea of contentment, the idea of simplicity, right? All you have, ideally, as a monk, I don't know how many monks only have this today. I'm not one of those who only has, I have to confess, I don't only have a robe and a ball. If you saw my kuti at Bodhinana Monastery, I have quite a few books, for example. I have to admit that. I don't have a large amount of things, but I do have a few books. It's very hard to get down to this minimum, but the ideal is just a bowl and just a robe, and the freedom you have when you have that is enormous. And these days there are very few what they call charika monks around, who sort of wander around all the time, who just do charika and pindabata everywhere. But if you only go back maybe 30, 40 years, in the northeast of Thailand, for example, and I know here in Sri Lanka as well, there were charika monks who would do wandering around. And then to be able to do that, you have to have a very simple life, just bowl and just robe. And Ajahn Brahmali told me when he did charika for about a year or so in the northeast of Thailand, he realized very quickly that he had taken too many things with him, and he started throwing things out, until eventually all he had was basically his bowls and his robe, and that was enough to live by. That's one of the beautiful things when you are in a Buddhist country. In fact, you don't even have to be in a Buddhist country. Even in non-Buddhist countries, when people see a monk and they see a nun and they see that all you have is these things, people often tend to become generous, right? People tend to want to give. They recognize that there's something nice here, and that brings up the generosity in people. And I even in Australia sometimes I have gone to places and spontaneously people give you things that you would never expect. And what a beautiful thing that is. So this, in a sense, goes back to this very simple practice. But the main idea here is an idea of contentment, right? Whatever you have, to be content with whatever that is. And to be content with simple things in life. That is the idea here. And of course, this is true for monastic life, but I recommend lay people to think in the same way. Because it's very easy to think that in lay life we don't have to be content, we can keep on striving for all these goods all the time. And of course that is sometimes part of living lay life. But if you want to find a sense of peace, if you want to find a sense of deep meditation, contentment is a very important part of that. So whatever it is that you have in life, just think, wow, how wonderful it is that I have at least this, and try to find a sense of contentment with that. And there is that beautiful verse in the Dhammapada that says that contentment is the highest wealth. Contentment is the highest wealth. You know that verse? That's one out of 4 lines. I'm not sure if I can remember the other ones. But the point is that no matter how much wealth you have, if you want more, you haven't got enough. The only time you have enough is when you're content, right? That's why contentment is the highest wealth. Virtue of the mental virtue here. And when you practice like this, the bliss that's right, the bliss that is blameless. So what is the bliss that is blameless? Well, there's 2 aspects to that bliss. First, there is the negative aspect. You don't feel any guilt, you don't feel any shame, you don't feel that you have done the wrong things. People who do a lot of bad things, they tend to feel a sense of darkness inside. There's no brightness there, there's no beauty inside of you. So that is gone. So that is the happiness of simply not feeling bad inside of you. But then there's also the opposite, the bliss of blamelessness, the bliss of thinking, I have done good things, right? I have not cheated anybody. I've helped other people feeling safe in this world. I've helped other people have a sense of trust and ease around me. So there's 2 aspects to that bliss. And this is the beginning of that bliss, which becomes so powerful and so useful for meditation practice. So you can see here how we're moving towards meditation, right? We're doing all the right things so we can start to experience happiness, pamoja, gladness, piti, all these things. And these become the tools, these become the psychological qualities that we require for meditation to take off. And that's why all this part of the path is so important. You can't throw these things out. You can't go straight to meditation practice. This is part of meditation practice. This is the foundation. You're laying the groundwork, and then meditation starts to take off. So that is all I want to talk about now. And tomorrow we can start to look more. I'm going to look more at right effort. And this is moving more into meditation territory. And we're going to have a look at that tomorrow. So that is all from now. So maybe we can all pay our respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha together here.